amount of material there, if you look carefully, and we're going to do some looking. So I'd like to think we would get through that chapter today, but I doubt it. So we'll begin and do what we can do. All right, Paul and Silas and their group has come to Philippi. And as they have come into the city, they have met with some women. Lydia has been converted, and Paul and Silas are going to stay, and their group are going to stay in Lydia's house and be provided for some period of time. We don't know how long that is, but she was, we suspect, a wealthy woman and provided for them while they were there. We have discussed before that hospitality in that world was very different than it is in ours because of the need of people privately providing for those who were strangers, travelers, and this sort of thing. And they watched out for one another. They did not have the motel and hotel services that we tend to have, and although there would have been some places that would have been, we suspect, commercially available, the people felt an obligation to provide for folks that they met, and would have been especially the case with this woman being converted, and that's what happens there. So she persuaded them, and they stayed with her. Verse 16. Now it happened as we went to prayer that a certain slave girl possessed with a spirit of divination met us, who brought her masters much profit by fortune telling. This girl followed Paul and us and cried out, saying, "These men are the servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to us the way of salvation." There's a lot of content in those two verses. All right. They were on their way to prayer. It doesn't say they went to pray. It says they were on their way to prayer. The Greek and syntax of this suggests this word being used much like we use the word church. You're going to church, going to the church. It can be a place, a gathering, a location. So there was a spot that they were going to. Was it the same spot that they met with the ladies who were at the beginning of the chapter? Or was this another place? Good question. Now, Paul and Silas have been there for some period of time. We don't know how long. With Lydia and her family, there's the beginning of a new church there. So they would have begun to meet on Sunday, on the Lord's Day, at some location. It may have been the same spot, but on the Lord's Day. Or it may have been somewhere else. Or it may have been a day not the Lord's Day, but that they were going to gather with a group. That part is uncertain. They met a certain slave girl. Slavery in the first century world was extremely common. In fact, historians describe that the Roman Empire ran on slavery. It was their form of economic growth. And I read, of course, some of it is based on speculative material. There are limited amount of historical references, but some good references exist. I have heard that the numbers of slaves in Rome itself, in the city of Rome, perhaps numbered 3 to 5 times more than the free people in Rome. How significant slavery was in that area. At any rate, this girl is a slave. How did she become a slave? Well, it is likely that she was a conquest of someone, or perhaps was a born child into a family of slavery. At the conquest of Erebus, the Romans announced that they had captured and put into service 150,000 slaves from the conquering of that town. Everyone who was taken, you had the choice, die or serve. Most people chose to serve, so you would live out the rest of your life as a servant to someone and be probably sold as chattel property and owned. it's a thing that we chafe at, to think that such a thing existed in that time, but it was the norm, not the exception, for slavery to exist in the ancient world. And all cultures apparently did it, including the Hebrews. They also had slaves, and God gave them instructions regarding how they were to treat the people whom they owned. So there's some interesting challenges here as we look at this. Now, this slave girl had a spirit within her. We might describe it as a demon. That's not the word that Luke uses in describing it, but says that she had a spirit, and it was the spirit of divination. Some of you may have a footnote there. The word that's actually used to describe it is the Greek word python, which was made reference to a snake history that had the idea with it of foretelling the future. And she was able to do this and had been used by the people who owned her. It says masters, so I'm not sure how this girl what ownership existed for her. It doesn't look like it's a single person, but rather somehow there's a multiple ownership of her. And they were using her to make money. She was a source of revenue because of this spirit. Now, all kinds of questions come up. Was this truly fortune telling? I mean, was there a true awareness of the future or not? And we can't go beyond what we have written in the text. You would assume, not necessarily so, that if they were making money off of it, that there had to be something there that people at least believed to be true. May not have been true, but they believed it to be true.
But you could assume that it was true also, because she said that Paul and them were from the Most High God.
What she claims is absolutely true. And so here's this woman, a walking billboard, saying that these guys are from God, proclaiming to us the message of God, and that's exactly what they were. You remember the discussion in Acts chapter 8 regarding Simon, the sorcerer. The people believed him or heeded him. It looks like he probably was a fake, more of a shenanigans of some sort. That does not appear to be the case here. Rather, this woman was possessed by a being, we'll say demonic, but by a being that provided her with this power. And they were using it. All right, so she is going to follow them and cry out, "These men are servants of the Most High God who proclaim to us the way of salvation." Is that a true statement? Yes. Yes. All right, so that's what we got. Okay, verse 18. I'll pause there. If you have a question. I'm moving rapidly, but I don't want to rush past something you want to speak on further. Okay, verse 18. This she did for many days. How many days? How many days is many days? A week? A month? 6 months? We don't know. Many days.
It's worthy of note. It's worth Luke emphasizing it.
Yes, it was not. It wasn't one, and it wasn't every once in a while. This person was following her, following Paul and Silas around. So once they made contact, they met. Then this spirit is moving around with Paul from then on, making this proclamation. And eventually Paul grows weary with this, annoyed, and casts out the spirit. So, verse 18. She did this for many days, but Paul, greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her," and he came out that very hour. Clearly, this was a spirit being that was in this girl, and Paul cast the spirit out. Okay? So now we have the girl return to her normal human-only state. And what's the result of that? She doesn't have her powers anymore. So whatever she could do before, they're gone. And
Tim, it's a little bit of a unique or odd response that Paul, you can see something good happen several times and say, okay, knock it off, it's all good, But it was kind of an odd response to me that he was, Scripture says, annoyed and turned away. But when he stopped that, why not have a walking billboard, if you're kind of coming in contact with people? So it makes me kind of think that, it sort of wasn't her, but it was this demon, and he knew it was maybe intended to be a little bit not for the right purpose or something. I don't know. It just makes me wonder about, this demon kind of taking charge of her and keep saying this in maybe a superficial way, and he knew it, and he said, okay, that's enough of this. I know what you're doing. Just kind of almost trying to disturb the situation. I don't know.
it would appear to have been disruptive.
Yeah.
And there were other disruptions. You remember when Paul and Barnabas first began their missionary journey, and they went to the island of Cyprus and met the guy who was trying to block them from talking to the proconsul there. And so Paul turned him blind, robbed him of sight for a period of time. So there's some pushback against the preaching of the gospel. Paul will have many times be in a town of Jews that begin to push back and sometimes create a mob that attacks him, which we're going to see in the future from this. But yeah, the period of time would perhaps be a factor. It happened many days, and for whatever reason, Paul eventually tired of this activity taking place and remedied it, which shows you that Paul could have done it at the very beginning, but chose not to for whatever reason, and but eventually grew tired of it. Lots of speculation, but we have.
I guess sometime or another Facebook post has to come down.
I guess not. All right, verse 19. When her masters saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to the authorities. How long did it take for them to determine that her status had changed? Were they there? Did they witness these events? Was there a crowd of people around Paul and Silas all the time that saw these things? Did somebody go and report back to them? Lots of good questions. None of them we can answer. All we know for sure is that the people who owned her, whatever they were, and it says it's plural, when they found out that she no longer had the ability to tell the future, their source of income was gone. And so they are now perturbed at Paul and Silas. What do? They grabbed them up and dragged them before the city magistrates. Now, it was common in the Roman world to have public access to, if you will, the court of law. If something happens in your life that threatens your safety or well-being, what do?
Call the police.
You're going to call 911. Somebody on the other end will put you on hold for 20 minutes. And then, oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? No, I'm kidding. Everyone does. So that's the first source. So you make that call, and then they sort it out. Do you need to talk to a fire person? Do you need to have an ambulance respond to you? Do you need a police officer? They'll sort it out. Well, what did you do before that? If you had trouble in the time of this time, what did you do? You drug them into town, and they had folks who have, all societies have a policing system of some sort. There is some aspect of law and order, the compliance with certain agreed to stipulations, regulations, laws, whatever, are necessary in order for people to live together. You've heard of and spent time talking about the Mayflower Compact. You get a group of people together, and for them to spend any time together, you've got to come up with some laws. Someone's got to be in charge. There needs to be some authority, or else we have anarchy without law, craziness. So there's a settled procedure and process. These men carried them into town, and the magistrates were available. There were people who had an administrative process of taking care of civilian matters in town. Remember, Philippi is a retired Roman soldier community. So there would have been lots of folks here who had military and jurisdictional experience and putting down rebellions and taking care of things of various kinds. Anyway, they bring them to the magistrates. What are the charges filed against Paul and Silas? Before we get there, we'll get there in the next statement. They're troubling our city. What do they say that Paul and Silas have done? First of all, there are 3 charges made. One, they're Jews. These are foreigners. These are not Roman citizens. They don't belong here. They have come in from outside. They are, well, we wouldn't use the term illegal aliens, but these are not our community folk. They are Jews. Well, what difference would it make if they're Jews if that didn't have a negative connotation in that time and in that place? So their first statement about them is, they're not of us. It's those Jewish folks. Number 2, they are those Jewish folks who have come in and have troubled our city exceedingly. Were the activities of Paul and Silas widely known in town? Clearly so. These guys use the fact that Paul and Silas have created an uproar in the town and are challenging their way of life as one of the things that is brought up against them. Now remember, Paul and Silas have been here for how long?
Many days at least.
Many days. Okay, so they have been there. They have had an impact on this town. Well, that's impressive right there. Now, up until the point that Paul cast out this demon, there was nothing going to be done about it. There was no conflict. There was no thing happening. So this spark, if you will, is going to create a reaction in the town. So we now have something that's going to widely expand the awareness of Paul and Silas and what they're doing in town. Had Paul not cast out the demon or the spirit out of this girl, this encounter wouldn't have taken place. What else wouldn't have taken place?
Well, it wouldn't have been charged for teaching what is illegal to Romans. That's what they're charging for now.
Yeah, but what else wouldn't have happened if Paul hadn't have cast out that demon out of this girl? He wouldn't have been in jail, and he wouldn't have met the jailer. So, as a result of this event, the conversion of the jailer and his family is going to result. Do good things happen from bad events? I'll make a reference to that tonight in worship if you are gathered with us this evening. Brought them to the magistrates, said, these men being Jews exceedingly trouble our city, and they teach customs which are not lawful for us being Romans to receive or observe. Did the teaching of the gospel conflict with the Roman society?
Yes. Caesar was
How so?
Caesar was supposed to be a god.
Okay.
God-like, so he was supposed to be the only one that they worshiped.
So if Paul was teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, that Jesus is Lord, then the Romans who practiced polytheism, they worshipped all kinds of gods. And Paul says in Acts chapter 17, the one God who created all the world I'm going to tell you about. You worship many gods, but I'm going to tell you about the one true God. So, yeah, Paul's message was going to be in conflict with Roman society. And all of the so-called gods that they worshipped were going to be, they're not compatible. All right, so we're Romans, they're Jews, and they're stirring up trouble for us. Now, when this message was heard, what's the first thing that happens? Verse 21, verse 22. The multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. Who responds first, according to Luke? The crowd. They have got a mob response from the group that is there. Was the owners of this slave girl taking Paul and Silas before the magistrates of the city? Was this a private thing? No, it was not. It was a public thing. It would have been done in the public square. I read an article that said that the judgment seat in the city of Philippi is one of the places that they think they have identified architecturally in the ruins of Philippi. They think they know where this happened because of the carvings and the design of the structures and things like that. That this would have been the common place for a Roman city to have the people come and meet. And so this is kind of a known thing. Well, when archaeologists uncover certain things and they know the period of the time, they say, here's what tended to happen in cities. And when they find it multiple times, you begin to identify certain constructions and things of this sort. So they brought them to the magistrates. The magistrates are going to hear the testimony. Before the magistrates rule, the mob is angry. So you've got an immediate outroar, and then they follow it. So the magistrates do what? Tear their clothes off and beat them. Well, now we find something about Roman society. What was the typical punishment for someone in this time? Beating. That's right. Let the beatings begin. And they tore their clothes off. Verse 23. When they had laid many stripes on them, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. Any of you ever been hit with a stick? What did it do to your body where the stick hit you? It leaves a mark. They have stripped all the clothing off of these men. They probably have been stretched out. And then rods are used to beat them. So you've got the bare backs of these men being hit with rods by men who are angry at them. What is it going to do to the backs of Paul and Silas? Everywhere they hit them, it's going to leave a mark. It's going to leave a stripe where that rod went across their back. And when they had laid many stripes on them, or put that in other words, when they had hit them many times. Paul will say to the Colossians, let no one challenge me anymore, because I bear in my body the marks of the punishment not doled out to Jesus. Paul says, I have received many marks from his beatings.
He said 3 times when he did beat with rods.
This is one of those.
Yeah, one of them.
There will be other opportunities for him to do that. But you think about not just the impact that, the beating, but now this is the result of the beating. They are striped. They have many marks on their body from these events taking place. And then they're thrown in prison. Okay?
There's also there's also a public shame to this.
Absolutely.
They're trying to go and preach the word. They're trying to convert people. They're trying to help people in this community. And here they are, stripped We don't know how naked they were, but they were
That's right.
pretty stripped in front of everybody.
It could have been
And this-
birthday suit naked. That's right.
And what do the people who are on the fence to conversion? What do they see of this?
That's right. Paul and Silas have now been branded criminals, publicly humiliated and beaten in town, and thrown in jail. Bo?
If you look at it on the other part a little bit, why are they, I mean, what do the Romans get out of beating people? You know, they're trying to install discipline and so forth. You know, trying to go back to the day that, you know, we've gone way, way too far away from that in this country. You can learn a little bit from that too.
What was it? Help me with the story here. Dozen years or so ago, was it a guy who vandalized a car that they were going to beat in Korea?
Singapore.
Somewhere?
Singapore.
They were going to cane him publicly, and there was a worldwide, or at least a United States-wide, outcry against, you know, this horrible barbaric treatment against this young man who had done whatever he did in this foreign country. And well, talk to any of our teachers. Oh wait, you have a little first-hand knowledge of that, don't you? We have lost discipline not only in our schools but in our society.
Yeah, people just don't understand. Like, and we've lost discipline in our home, in the church, because you can just see the way society is acting today. I mean, we do not, you know, the Bible says, spare the rod and spoil the child, and we just got away from it too much. They talk about people killing in Chicago and all over the place, and shootings in Huntsville, different places. We don't have the discipline enough, and it's just as bad.
Spare the rod and hate the child, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it's. We're hating them. That's right. We're sure not dissing them. We're not teaching them anything. You know, I don't think you can teach Christ to kids without discipline.
The amount of fathers missing in families is a huge part of that.
There are a lot of factors here.
But even fathers
Clearly,
in the family
clearly,
not
we've
disciplined.
tapped into, you know, a difference. This was in this society. Now, was this an attempt to be corrective? Hey, this doesn't look corrective at all. This is punitive. This is outright punishment. This is not the word discipline at its core means to instruct in the way. Now, that instruct in the way can have many forms. That can be, you know, teaching ABCs on a chalkboard. That's instruction. That's discipline. A person who becomes a disciple of another, that's the concept of one who learns. The disciples of Jesus didn't beat them. He instructed them, okay? He disciplined them. So discipline has, well, wait, you know, when we talk about education, it has disciplines. You have law, you have engineering, you have English, you have mathematics. These are disciplines. We use that terminology if we refer to education. So it's a broad term which understands the concept of passing along information. It has knowledge-based information. It has corrective-based information, and sometimes it has corporal punishment, a punitive response with information. And yeah, this is a very different society than ours. Today, the mobs rise up in opposition to our authority figures. You know, it's hard to imagine that our police forces are under assault by folks who are trying to, for whatever reason, there are a multitude of reasons, attack the police officers. It's complicated. There's a lot of things happening in our world. We're in a different world than they were. Interesting observations. All right, so they've made many stripes on them, threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. All right, so he's got a job. The guy runs the jail. Typical jail of the first century world had at least two components. The concept of jail is to restrict the ability of people to move about life normally. We have, in our prison system, several different levels of incarceration. If you drive down the road at any given time, you may see folks out in orange jumpsuits picking up garbage along the road. What are those people doing? Why are they doing it?
They saw Dick doing it, so they decided they should do it.
It's a work. It's a work patrol. Community service.
Victor, he has accused you of.
He gonna have an orange jumpsuit on.
I don't have the orange.
Okay.
You've broken the society's norms, so you're going to feed back to the society. You're
All
going to
right.
help everybody out.
These are individuals who are in custody by the civil authorities, but they're not being held in a jail cell with their hands cuffed, are they? No, they're out in the streets picking up litter. Why? Because they are not considered to be a threat to society in terms of them being out there, and so they're getting some use from them. And as a rule, do prisoners like this or not?
They prefer it to be an inmate.
Yes, this is very much a privileged thing because you get out of the jail, you're out in the world, you get your orange jumpsuit on, that's for sure. But still, it's a lot better to be walking up and down the grassy streets than it is to be stuck inside a jail cell or held inside the prison. So, yes, that's considered a privileged position. They are not being forced to do that. This is a volunteer spot. Paul and Silas are going to be put, the jailer's got multiple levels of places. You know, if we have, we talk about a supermax prison, well, what is that? As opposed to a minimum security prison. What's the difference? Well, the difference is you've got individuals who have been classified by the state in terms of their risk. Either their risk to society or their risk to escape, the seriousness of their crime. And if they have done a crime that is nonviolent, that is, they're going to be still put in prison or in jail, but it's going to be a less confining environment. The prisoners could have been kept in this jail just behind the walls and been freely allowed to move around and have interaction with visitors, with their family. People brought them stuff. Prisons in this world did not provide for the prisoners. If you got thrown in jail, if your family didn't feed you, you starved. They had to provide for you.
It's in a lot of places in the world right now.
Well, I don't know about that, but
I can tell you when I was stationed at Fort Bliss, we had a lot of people that would get in trouble going across the border to Juarez, Mexico. And the local jails, now not the prison, the local jails though, same thing. Families required to come feed you. I had a situation, I had a soldier who carried a weapon across the border, had no business doing that, was put in a local jail. And the trouble was that his wife didn't feel like going over to bring food over to him. And he had to stay there, I don't know, a couple weeks or something. But it became an issue because if his wife doesn't do it, somebody else has to bring him food.
Right.
They don't provide it.
In the Roman environment, to be kept in jail was not actually considered to be a punishment in and of itself. That usually was just you're being held until trial or something else comes along and happens. In this particular case, the confinement is going to be very short term. They're just going to keep them one day and let him go. This is more of another shaming thing. You know, we're going to beat you and throw you in prison. Well, the jailer decides that Paul and Silas, because of their situation, stirred up the whole town. They are worthy of very strict confinement. So they're not in the outer courtyard where all the general population would be, but rather they are in the inner prison. They're in the inner cells, and not only are they inside the lockup area, but they are in stocks. Their feet are in stocks. So he has made them as secure as facilities at that time would allow. They're in solitary confinement. Equivalency of our day in terms of the lockup. He's locked them away as close as he can. What would be typical to hear in a prison at night from prisoners who had been beaten? Moaning, crying, weeping, cursing. You know, do you spend any time outside your house at night? I'm not talking to my wife. She doesn't. I do. You're liable to find me out wandering the neighborhood at all hours. Interesting things happen after about 9 or 10 o'clock. Neighborhoods get quiet. Quiet. You can hear a dog bark 2 blocks away. It gets quiet. With a lack of sound around us, people are going to sleep. Sound carries. You can hear things all over the place. Well, here's this just prison. It's dark. It's quiet. And there's not moaning and groaning and cursing going on from Paul and Silas. At midnight, what do?
Praying and singing hymns.
They start singing. How many times do you think singing had happened in that prison at night?
0.
My guess is that is probably correct. That there had been, up until this time, no singing. And they are praying and singing. Do you think Paul and Silas were praying privately, quietly, in hushed tones? No. They are publicly praying to God, and they are singing. They're not trying to hide anything. And what else is happening? Verse 25. The prisoners are listening. Of course they are. They hear that. Now, think about this for a minute. How unusual the response of Paul and Silas are to the kind of hostility that has been brought onto them. Why are they in prison? They're in prison because they're preaching the gospel. Why did Joseph end up in prison? Because he would not sleep with his master's wife. And got thrown in jail for that. That's really not a crime, is it? Here's Paul and Silas, and they have been beaten and thrown in jail. Why? Because Paul cast a spirit out of this demon-possessed girl. And they've been preaching the gospel, and now they have been beaten severely and thrown in prison. And their response is praying and singing praises to God. Now, folks, you're going to have to wrap your head around that. That is not the normal kind of response that human beings have to being oppressed. Like Jesus on the cross and Stephen at their deaths, for them intervening on their behalf. Jesus said, Father, they don't know what they're doing. Stephen says, don't lay this charge to them. And we're going to have to quit there. I heard the bell. All right, so we're going to end right there, because once we start the next part, there's no end. We will begin, Lord willing, 3 weeks from today with verse 25 and start talking about the events that took place from Paul and Silas being in prison and what happens next. Question for you to consider between now and then: was the jailer listening to Paul and Silas singing? We'll answer that next week. Well, next class. All right, let me write myself a note so I'll remember. Thank you for your time and attention.